President Barack Hussein Obama delivered his most inspirational words of the last 8 years. He said, goodbye. It was the longest goodbye, longer than the goodbye speeches of Reagan, Bill Clinton, and George W. combined. But what else did you expect from the celebrity in chief? Giving speeches and saying things has always been what he's best at, a lot of talk and no action. Except on Obamacare, of course, the failed enterprise that even Mr. Hillary Rodham calls a crazy system. But the saddest part of the night was not Obama saying goodbye, despite what the snowflakes over at BuzzFeed may feel. Good Lord. No, the saddest part was that after 8 years in the election and re-election of our first black president, we don't have much to show for it other than, well, failed Obamacare, failed Iran deal, failed no strategy for national security, race relations worse now than any time since the civil rights movement. Yeah, not a whole lot of hope and change, just a lot of smoke and mirrors. Oh, and warning us of the dangers of weather while also refusing to say radical Islam, warning us of the inevitable man-made apocalypse of climate change, meanwhile ushering thousands of Syrian refugees into our backyard, warning us about Russia, meanwhile cuddling up to Iran. But why talk about failures when he could pat himself on the back over and over and over again? His shoulders are certainly feeling it today, poor guy. But at least he had no major scandals, right? Not like Fast and Furious, IRS targeting of conservatives, Benghazi, NSA overreach, the VA sham, the exchange of one traitor for 5 terrorists, and of course, $150 billion to Iran under the table. In fact, it seems the only folks that should be thanking Obama at all are America's enemies. They've been thriving under Obama. Think about it. And yeah, we are great because of our diversity, but problem with BO is he always confuses diversity for illegal immigration and ISIS sleeper cell transplants. That's not diversity, that's dangerous, and a slap in the face to the Irish and the Italians and every other immigrant who came here following the rule of law. He had such an opportunity and he blew it. He blew it big league. And no, Donald Trump didn't get elected because of divided government, but didn't Obama create that environment? Have we ever been this divided after 8 years of a man who was supposed to bring about the biggest hope and change in history? Yeah, about that. But 19 million...
Oh. This is my last pack. I swear this is my last pack. Alright, listen. Real talk. Time for real talk. I get asked often in the comments and on Twitter, and not exclusively by trolls. So I'm going to, since this is not a question that exclusively comes from trolls, I'm going to give it some credence. I think because of sometimes my tendency towards hyperbole, perhaps, or my passionate disposition, maybe some things get lost in the mire. Bronx, do you care about white victims? That's often brought to my attention and presented to me by people that I respect and I think are legitimately concerned. So let me clarify a couple of things. Number one, I am of mixed heritage. I am ethnically Latino. And I am racially white. Okay? I have European heritage as well, so I'm a Euro-Latino. There are Afro-Latinos, and, you know, my grandfather on my father's side was an Afro-Latino. Well, actually, He was an Indian, a Taino, so I'm not sure if he was an Afro-Latino or if he just counts as indigenous. He was considered racially black. But I am obviously racially white. So, when you ask me, Bronx, do you care about white victims? Yeah. Yeah. And it's not as simple as, well, of course I do because they look like me. I'd like to think that being a progressive means that I care because of shared recognition of humanity. I'd even go beyond humanity in terms of my compassion doesn't stop at human beings. I do. Even though I haven't been vegan, I was vegan for a few years, but I haven't been vegan in a while. I do feel deep compassion for other living things. I do feel camaraderie with animals and even insects. I feel quite bad having to resolve pests. Gives me guilt, gives me grief. I guess that's probably the most SJW thing you'll hear for the next, 20 years. But I do care about white victims. I do care about white victims of crime. I do care about white victims of poverty. I do care about white victims of racism. Because it does exist. Racism against white people is not as prevalent or as much of an existential threat to the community of white people as it is to the community of black people, and the reverse, meaning that white racism is certainly an institutional threat to the existence of non-white people, in terms of employment and housing and the judiciary, the government, politics, mass incarceration, harsher sentencing. You can, the list goes on for the way that racial discrimination against non-whites is a institutional problem, whereas discrimination against whites by non-whites is a social problem. But it is a problem, and it should be addressed. We should not be racist towards any group or xenophobic towards any group. That includes, I do feel compassion for white immigrants who perhaps come into an environment where they have to take shit for being Europeans, because that does happen. But again, it's not the prevailing problem in terms of immigrants taking shit. Okay. So, why would people think that I don't care about white victims? Well, rational skeptics, here is where the nuance comes in. I don't endorse white victimhood. How is white victimhood different from white victims, you say? Bronx. Stop fucking with words. Okay. White victimhood is a philosophical or ideological, depending on whether it's mixed with politics, stance that is a response to progress that's made by groups of marginalized people. White victimhood is a collective victimhood. And I just don't think the facts in the West, and particularly in North America, support a narrative of collective white victimhood. It's certainly, American history fucking supports very well the history of collective black victimhood. That's why I don't get when someone like the Amazing Atheist goes, black culture is a victim cult. Really? Have black people never been victimized in North America, particularly in the continental United States? Victim cult. Think about the idea of collective white victimhood. And people come and they say, Irish slaves. Well, that's very tragic. I care about the suffering of the Irish indentured servants. They were subjected to inhuman labor standards, and I care about them as victims of cruel labor practices. Because Irish people were not slaves. They were de facto slaves, perhaps, but under law, they were still free. They may not have been white, necessarily, under law, but that would change, wouldn't it? They surely could beat the brown paper bag test handily. So, no, Irish slavery is not a case for collective white victimhood. It is a case for ethnic discrimination and xenophobia against Irish immigrants. Irish is a nationality. It is not a race. My Italian ancestry on my mother's side, they came to the United States of America. They were not considered white either. And they were mistreated, and they were impoverished and lived in ghettos, but Italians in ethnicity. And the discrimination was not color. So no. Collective white victimhood is largely a reactionary myth that responds and pops its head up and starts to bark and scream whenever anybody challenges privilege. (1964) Civil Rights Act, white victimhood. End of slavery, white victimhood. Gay marriage. White victimhood. So I am a compassionate progressive, and when I make progressive propositions, I mean to include all marginalized people. That includes marginalized white people. Privileged white people You can be a good ally, but if you come to me and bitch about how you're being victimized for the color of your skin, this color, I'm going to laugh at you because you're making a fucking joke.